Welcome to Diploma Guru CSE&IT. In this video, we are going to learn about the basics of IP address in computer network subject. So after completion of this video, you can able to know what is an IP address and what is the IP address format and different types of IP addresses and the classification of IP address system. Okay, so an IP address is a unique address assigned to each computing device in network. So every machine in the internet must be assigned with some unique address. So that is an IP address. These IP addresses are generally assigned by the internet service providers to all the devices present in the network. These devices, the computing devices uses these IP addresses to identify the networks or to identify the host to communicate with the different devices in the internet. Okay, generally the IP address is a 32-bit binary address. These 32-bit binary address is written in four octants. They are separated with a dot. Okay, so each octant can also be written in decimal notation. Okay, the IP address is divided into two components. Those that is a network ID part and a host ID part. So the entire 32-bit is divided into network ID and host ID part. The leftmost side, some of the bits we are calling it as a network ID part, and the remaining bits we are calling it as a host ID part. Okay, so this network ID and host ID part generally combiningly we are calling it as an IP address. So this network ID part generally represent the IP address of the network. It generally represents the network address. Okay, and it is used to identify the network in the internet. Okay, and coming to the host ID, it represents the IP address of the host, and it is used to identify the host within the network. Okay, so for example, within the network there are many systems that are connected in the network. So we can identify the individual machine with the help of this host ID. Okay, and collection of several networks which are connected to the internet, so that can be identified with the help of this network ID bits. Okay, now coming to the different types of IP addresses. So we have two types of IP addresses. One is a static IP address and another is the dynamic IP address. Generally, a static IP address means it is an IP address that once assigned to a network element always remains the same. Once it is assigned to a machine, so it remains fixed. Okay, so they are configured manually. These static IP addresses are generally configured manually. Okay, manually by the system administrator, okay, or network administrators. Okay, coming to the dynamic IP addresses. These dynamic IP address is a temporarily assigned IP address to a network element. So here network element is nothing but a host in the network. Okay, a computer or any computing device in a network. Okay, so we are saying that this dynamic IP address is a temporarily assigned IP address. Means if a particular device which is assigned with some IP address, if that particular device is not used for a certain period of time, then automatically that IP address is assigned to some another system within the same network. Okay, so it can be assigned to a different device if it is not in use. Okay, so generally this DHCP servers or PPPoE servers are assigns these dynamic IP addresses to the hosts or computing devices that are connected in a network. Okay, so here is an example of an IP address. So this is the binary representation of an IP address. So this totally 32 bits are there in this particular IP address. These 32 bits are divided into 4 octants, and these octants are separated with dots. Okay, so the individual octant values can also be represented in decimal notation. So this is first octant, second and third, fourth octant, and they are also separated with the dot notation. So this is called an IP address decimal notation, and this is an IP address binary notation. Okay, so coming to the IP addressing. So there are two systems in which an IP addresses are classified. They are classful addressing system and classless addressing system. This classless addressing system is also called as classless interdomain routing. Okay, so in the upcoming videos we are going to discuss in detail about this classful addressing system and classless addressing system. Okay, so Thank you for watching. If you are watching for first time, please comment and subscribe.